My family asked me to postpone my wedding for a vacation. I lied that I would, got married without them, and when my brother confessed, he did it on purpose. My parents said nothing. I'm 32 years old. I work at a tech company doing technical support, and about 3 months ago, I married the woman of my dreams in a small, perfect ceremony. Sounds nice, right? Well, turns out my parents weren't there, and not because they were sick or there was some emergency, but because they literally chose to go on vacation to Australia with my brother and his family instead of going to my wedding. I know, it sounds crazy, but I swear it's real. And what happened after basically destroyed whatever relationship was left between us. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand why this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Because the truth is, this goes back way, way before. When I was a kid, let's just say I wasn't exactly the model son. My brother Philip, who's 8 years older than me, was always the perfect child, the typical golden child who got the best grades, was captain of the soccer team, had millions of friends, and basically everything he touched turned to gold. I, on the other hand, was a mess. It's not like I was a delinquent or anything like that, but I did get into trouble, got bad grades, got suspended from school every other week, and basically was the black sheep of the family. My parents, Samuel and Ruth, never let me forget that. It was always, why can't you be more like your brother? Or Philip would never have disappointed us like this. Or my favorite, we don't know what we did wrong with you. I grew up hearing that constantly, and I swear it shapes you in a really messed up way. You know what I mean? Philip is now 40. He's a super successful businessman, has a perfect wife and 2 perfect kids, lives in a huge house, and basically is my parents' pride and joy. I managed to get my life together despite everything, got a decent job, became stable, matured as a person, but for my parents, I always remained the problem child who caused them so many headaches. It didn't matter that I'd gone years without getting into trouble, that I had a stable job, that I paid my bills and lived a normal, decent life. To them, I would always be Adam the disaster, and Philip would always be Philip the perfect. About a year and a half ago, I met Rebecca. Well, technically I met her 6 years ago, but we officially started dating a year and a half ago. She's incredible. She understands me in a way nobody else does. She knows the whole story with my family and has never judged me for any of it. We work at the same company. She's in the HR department, and basically we became best friends before we started dating. When I proposed to her 10 months ago, it was the happiest day of my life up until that point. We told our families about 8 months before the date we'd chosen for the wedding, because we wanted everyone to have enough time to make plans, request days off from work, all that stuff. My family reacted weird from the start. My parents said something like, "How nice," but didn't seem really excited. And Philip didn't even bother to congratulate me properly, just sent a message that said, "Congratulations," without exclamation points or anything. Rebecca's parents, on the other hand, were super excited, crying with happiness and everything. The difference was so obvious that even Rebecca noticed and asked me if my family was always that cold with me. I told her yes, that it was normal, that it didn't affect me. But honestly, it did hurt a little, though I was already used to it. Months went by and we started planning the wedding. We didn't want anything huge or super elaborate, just a nice, intimate ceremony with people who really mattered to us, like 50 people max. I sent all the details to my parents, the exact date, the venue, everything, and they said they'd be there. Philip also confirmed his attendance, though in a really curt way like, "Yes, I'll be there, nothing more." I thought, well, at least they'll be present, that's something, right? 2 weeks before the wedding, too. 2 weeks. My parents call me on the phone and my mom starts with, "Son, we need to talk about something important." I thought someone was sick or something serious had happened. But no. Turns out Philip had planned a family vacation to Australia, like a 3-week trip with his wife and his 2 kids, and had invited my parents. And guess what dates he chose for this trip? Exactly. The same dates that included my wedding. My mom tells me this like it's the most normal thing in the world, like it wasn't strange at all that they were considering missing my wedding for a vacation. I stayed silent for a moment because I literally couldn't process what I was hearing. Then my dad grabs the phone and tells me, "Adam, the thing is Philip paid for the whole trip, already bought the tickets, booked incredible hotels, and this has been planned for months. It's a unique opportunity to spend quality time with your brother and his kids, your nephews that we barely see. And I'm thinking, there are you? Really telling me this? Are you really justifying missing my wedding for a luxury vacation? I said, Dad, I told you about my wedding 8 months ago. 8 months. How is it possible that Philip planned a trip for the same dates? And he answers me, well, these things happen, son. Sometimes dates coincide. My mom takes the phone back and tells me in that voice she always uses when she wants me to do something I don't want to do. Honey, couldn't you postpone the wedding a few weeks? Or maybe do it later. When we get back from the trip, it would be much easier for everyone. And that's when something in me broke. It wasn't an outburst of anger or anything dramatic. It was more like a sudden clarity, like when you finally understand something that was always right in front of you. I told them yes, sure, that I'd talk to Rebecca and see if we could move the date, and my mom got super happy and told me, I knew you'd understand. You've always been so understanding, which was ironic, considering I was never their favorite son, but whatever. I hung up the phone and Rebecca saw my face and knew immediately that something was wrong. I told her everything and she was in shock, like literally mouth open, unable to believe what she'd just heard. She told me, we're not postponing anything. Your family is crazy if they think we're going to change all our plans because they decided to go on vacation. And I agreed, but I also knew this was going to cause a huge problem. I thought about all the options, all the possible ways to handle this, and finally decided on something that maybe was immature or vindictive. I don't know. But at that moment, it seemed right to me. I told my parents yes, that we were going to postpone the wedding, that I'd talk to the venue and see what we could do. They were thrilled. My mom even cried with happiness, saying she knew I'd do the right thing, that this showed how mature I'd become. Lie. We didn't postpone anything. We continued with the wedding exactly as it was planned, on the same date, at the same place, with the same people. Only my parents and my brother weren't on the guest list because supposedly they were in Australia. The wedding day was perfect. And when I say perfect, I mean genuinely beautiful and special. Rebecca was gorgeous. Her parents cried through the entire ceremony. Our friends were there supporting us. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt like I was surrounded by people who really loved me and cared about me. There was a moment during the reception where I looked around and realized I didn't miss my parents being there at all. And that was liberating and sad at the same time. You know what I mean? Like you realize the family you choose is better than blood family, but it also hurts to accept that. We uploaded photos of the wedding to our social media because, it's normal, right? Everyone shares photos of their wedding. I wasn't thinking about my parents when I did it. Honestly, in that moment, I was so happy I didn't even remember the family drama. We posted them like 2 days after the wedding, when we were already back home enjoying being newlyweds, and I basically forgot about the whole thing completely. My parents came back from their Australia trip about a week after our wedding, and apparently they saw the photos on Facebook or Instagram. I'm not sure which, but somehow they saw them. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning on a Monday. I was still asleep because it was my day off, and it was my mom calling literally 20 times in a row. I answered thinking someone had died or something because who calls like that if it's not an emergency? And the first thing I hear is my mom screaming, like really screaming. What did you do? How could you do this to us? It took me a second to get my bearings and understand what she was talking about, and when I finally processed that she was referring to the wedding, I told her in the calmest voice I could, do what exactly to you? And she started crying and screaming at the same time, saying, how was it possible that I'd gotten married without them? How could I lie to them? That this was the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to them in their lives. My dad grabbed the phone and was equally furious, saying I was a liar, that I'd deceived them, that this showed what kind of person I was. I told them, you chose not to be there. You decided that a vacation with Philip was more important than my wedding. I just continued with my plans like any normal person would do. My dad started saying that Philip didn't know the trip dates coincided with my wedding, that it had been an honest confusion, and I just laughed because that was obviously a lie. Philip knew the dates perfectly well. I'd told him personally at a family dinner like 9 months before, and besides, my parents also knew because I'd reminded them multiple times. The conversation got worse, both sides yelling, me saying things I Probably shouldn't have said, but that I really felt, them accusing me of being a terrible and ungrateful son. Eventually, I hung up the phone because there was no point continuing to talk. We weren't really listening to each other. Rebecca was awake next to me and hugged me, and I didn't cry or anything. I just felt empty, like emotionally drained. I thought that would be the end, that they wouldn't contact me anymore and that basically our family relationship had officially ended. And honestly, part of me was at peace with that. But then, like 3 days later, they showed up at my house. And it was a Saturday afternoon. I was watching Netflix with Rebecca, and suddenly they knocked on the door insistently. I opened it, and there were my parents with suitcases, straight from the airport apparently, because my dad was still wearing that ugly jacket he wears for traveling. They said they needed to talk to me immediately, that this couldn't stay like this, that we were family and we had to work things out. I let them in because I wasn't going to have an argument at my front door for all the neighbors to hear, and we sat in the living room. My mom started talking in that disappointed mother voice she perfected over the years, saying she couldn't believe I'd been capable of hurting them like that they'd given me everything in life, that they'd sacrificed so much for me, and this is how I repaid them. I tried to stay calm and told her, "Mom, you chose a vacation over my wedding. There's no other way to see it." And she insisted it had been a misunderstanding, that Philip didn't know, that if they'd known I was going to go through with the wedding, obviously they wouldn't have left. My dad was sitting there nodding to everything my mom said, adding comments now and then about how I'd always been problematic, how I always found ways to cause drama, how even in something as important as a wedding, I'd found a way to do things wrong. And that's when something in me exploded. I told them everything. Absolutely everything I'd kept inside for years. I told them they'd always made me feel like the son they didn't want, that Philip had always been the favorite and I was always the problem, that nothing I ever did was good enough for them, that I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their approval and love, but it was never enough. My mom started crying, saying that wasn't true, that they loved me the same as Philip, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I kept talking, telling them I didn't care if Philip knew or didn't know about the dates, that the point was they'd chosen, that they'd had a decision to make, and they chose not to be there on one of the most important days of my life. Rebecca was in the kitchen, could hear everything but stayed out because this was between my family and me. The argument lasted like 2 hours, going in circles, nobody giving in, everyone saying hurtful things that probably can't be forgotten. Finally, my dad stood up and said that if I wasn't willing to be reasonable, then they had nothing more to do there, that they'd call me when I was ready to apologize like the adult person I was supposed to be. My mom looked at me with those eyes full of tears and said, "I don't know who you are anymore, Adam," and they left. After that, there was silence for like 2 weeks. They didn't call me. I didn't call them. We basically acted like the other didn't exist. Philip didn't contact me either, which didn't surprise me because he always avoided any kind of family conflict. He preferred to stay on the sidelines and let things work themselves out or just rot without his intervention. Then one day I received a text message from my mom, long, like a complete essay. It said they'd been thinking a lot, that they regretted how they'd handled things, that they understood I was upset, that they'd been upset too, but at the end of the day we were family and family forgives. It ended by inviting Rebecca and me to dinner the next, and Friday at their house to clear things up properly and start fresh. I showed the message to Rebecca, and she told me to do what felt right, that she'd support me in any decision, but to be careful and not expect too much, because people like that rarely really change. I decided to go because, I don't know, I guess part of me still wanted to believe we could fix this, that maybe they really were willing to acknowledge their mistake and we could have some kind of functional relationship from there on. I replied to my mom that yes, we'd go, and she sent like 5 excited messages saying she was so happy that she was going to cook my favorite dishes, that this was going to be a new beginning for everyone. On Friday, we arrived at my parents' house at 7 in the evening like they'd asked. I knocked on the door and my mom opened with a huge smile, hugged both of us, and invited us in. Everything seemed normal until we entered the living room and I saw that Philip, his wife, and his 2 kids were sitting on the couch. I stopped dead. My mom took my arm and said, "Surprise, we thought it would be good for everyone to be here to work this out as a family," and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Philip got up and came toward me with that arrogant smile he's always had, extending his hand to greet me like we were business colleagues instead of brothers who weren't speaking. I didn't shake his hand, just looked at him and then looked at my parents. My dad said, "Sit down, let's talk about this like civilized people," and pointed to the chairs around the dining table that was already set with food. Rebecca squeezed my hand. I could feel she was as uncomfortable as I was, but trying to keep her composure. We sat down. We all sat at that tense and strange table, and my mom started serving the food like this was a normal family dinner. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes, just the sound of plates and silverware, until my dad finally broke the silence saying we were there, to clear up misunderstandings and move forward. Philip cleared his throat and said, "Look, Adam, I'm really sorry about everything that happened. I honestly didn't know the trip dates were going to coincide with your wedding." And I just stared at him because I knew it was a lie. He knew perfectly well. Then he added, "And this was what really made me explode. But you also have to understand that it was irresponsible of you not to confirm with everyone before keeping the date. If you'd really wanted us there, you would have worked with us to find a date that worked for everyone." I sat there for a moment processing what I'd just heard, and then I started laughing. But it wasn't a laugh of amusement, but of total disbelief. Rebecca put her hand on my leg like saying, "Stay calm," but I was already beyond that. I told Philip, "Are you really going to sit there and say you didn't know? I told you the dates at Christmas dinner last year. I mentioned it in the family chat like 5 times. Mom and Dad knew. Everyone knew." Philip was going to respond, but my mom quickly intervened, saying, Okay, maybe there was confusion in communication, but what's important is that we're here now trying to fix things." My dad nodded and said, "Exactly. We need to leave the past in the past and focus on being a family again." And I realized in that moment what was really happening. This wasn't a real apology. This was an ambush to make me feel like I was the problem, that I was the one who needed to apologize and return to the family fold, where Philip was perfect, and I was the disaster who should be grateful they still accepted me. I stood up from the table. Rebecca stood up with me immediately. I told my parents, "I'm not doing this. I'm not going to sit here and let you convince me that what happened was my fault or that it was a simple misunderstanding. You chose not to be at my wedding. You chose Philip and his luxury vacation over me, and now you want me to act like nothing. I happened." My mom started crying again. Philip looked annoyed. My dad looked angry. Philip's kids were confused watching all the adults fighting. Philip then said something I didn't expect. "Okay, you want the truth, Adam. Here it is. Yes, I knew the dates of your wedding when I planned the trip. I did it on purpose because, honestly, I didn't want to go to your wedding. You've always been a problem. You've always caused drama. And I thought if I did this trip, Mom and Dad would have an excuse not to go either without feeling guilty. I thought you'd realize and postpone the wedding like a normal person instead of going ahead just to prove a point." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather, and my parents stayed quiet, not defending me, not telling him he was wrong, just quiet. I looked at my mom and asked her, "Did you know this?" And she looked away. My dad said, "Adam, your brother is being honest now. That's what you asked for, isn't it?" As if Philip's honesty and growth, admitting he'd sabotaged my wedding on purpose, was something admirable. In that moment, I knew there was nothing to save here, that these people were never going to change. They were never going to see me as anything more than the problem son, the son who wasn't as good as Golden Philip. I told Rebecca we're leaving and walked toward the door. My mom ran after me saying, "Please, Adam, don't leave like this. We can talk about this." But I was already outside. Rebecca followed me, and we got in the car. I could hear my dad yelling something from the door, but I didn't stop. Just started the car and drove home in silence. When we got home, Rebecca hugged me and told me, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry your family is like this," and I finally cried. I hadn't cried this whole time. Not when my parents told me they weren't coming to the wedding. Not when we argued. Not at any point. But there finally everything came out. I cried for the family I never had, for the father who never really saw me, for the mother who always preferred my brother. For all the years I spent trying to be enough and never achieving it. After that night, I blocked my parents on everything. Phone, social media, email, everything. I also blocked Philip and his wife. Rebecca did the same because she said if they didn't respect me, then they didn't deserve access to her either. It was liberating in a way, like closing a chapter that should have closed years ago, but that I insisted on keeping open, hoping things would miraculously get better. It's been like 3 months since all that. My parents tried to contact me through other relatives, uncles and cousins who sent me messages saying I should give them another chance. That family is family. All those things people say when they don't really understand how toxic a family relationship can be. I briefly explained the situation to those who really mattered to me and most understood. Some thought I was being too harsh. But anyway, it's my life and my decision. Rebecca and I finally went on our honeymoon last month. We'd postponed it because of all the drama, but decided it was time. We went to Costa Rica, 2 incredible weeks at the beach, not thinking about any of this, just enjoying being married and really starting our life together. I didn't receive a single message from my parents during that time, which was both a relief and a reminder that they'd really accepted I wasn't going to come crawling back begging for forgiveness. Now I'm focused on building my own family with Rebecca, on surrounding myself with people who really value and love me unconditionally. Does it hurt? Of course it hurts. I'm not going to lie and say I'm completely at peace with having cut contact with my parents. There are days when I think about them, when I wonder if I made the right decision, but then I remember that dinner. I remember Philip admitting he sabotaged my wedding on purpose, and my parents saying nothing to defend me, and I know I did the right thing. Last week, Rebecca told me she'd seen my mom at the supermarket. My mom saw her too, but just stood there looking at her from afar, and then went down another aisle. Rebecca asked me how I felt about that, and honestly, I don't know. Part of me misses my parents, or rather, misses the idea of having parents who love me unconditionally. But the reality is, I never had that. It was always conditional, always compared to Philip, always less than enough. So I guess here I am, 32 years old, newly married, not speaking to my parents or my brother, building a life without them. I don't know if things will ever change, if they'll ever really reach out to me, or if this is permanent. For now, I'm focused on my marriage, on my wife who's incredible and supports me in everything, and on the family we're building together. And that has to be enough, right?